Today is another tutorial of C language beginner. This time I will talk about the history of computer science. The history of computer science already began in 5000 before Christus. There has been invented the first number system. Then between 500 and 300 before Christus, the basic concept of logic has been established, and later on the first algorithmic methods has been invented. About 800 years later, the first gear-driven calculating machine has been invented by Wilhelm Schickard and Tübingen. And 300 years later, the century first freely programmable computer with floating point arithmetic and binary system relays has been invented by Konrad Zuse. In the same year, Alan Turing worked on the theory of computability, and as you may know, he also invented the Turing machine. Also in 1941, the coding or information theory has been established by Claude Shannon. And 5 years later, the first generation computers has been invented, and they worked on it for 8 years, sorry. And in 1953, the first programming language has been invented. It is called Fortran. 2 years later, the second generation computer has been invented, and they worked on it for 7 years. And this time we already have transistors and batch processing. In 1959, we already have the programming language COBOL and Lisp. And 3 years later, we already had the third generation computers. And they worked 14 years on it. And we already have, as you might know, integrated circuits and multi-programming time share. This is also really common in electronics. And in 1969, the programming language C has been invented. And 2 years later, we also have another programming language. It is called Pascal, followed 1 year later by Prolog. And in the 1970s, the term object-oriented programming has been introduced. 6 years later, we already had the fourth computer generation, and 3 years later, the programming language C++ has been published. 6 years later, the popular programming language Java has been invented and published. And in 2000, we already had the programming language C#. Thanks for your attention.